It's often said that at the time of one's death, there's a life review where everything that happened that was significant flashes before your eyes, or your mind's eye, if you don't have eyes yet or left. So I've thought about this idea for a while of just doing my own life review in the form of an autobiography. And I'm going to make sure that I don't go longer than 10 minutes for each segment, because my videos are limited to that length. So I've been talking for a little bit, so I'll set this at 9:30. And begin with my birth. I enjoy watching biography on Biography channel, by the way. I think it's an interesting way to learn about myself and how people do life. So if it's a person that I'm somewhat interested in, then it's interesting to see how did their story unfold, because we're writing our stories all the time. But with no further ado, here's my birth. I was born July 2nd, 1967 at 3:53 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in a small town in Michigan along the Canadian border. And I was not allowed to be seen. I think my birth mom was passed out at the time, but they put a sheet up back then when a child was being given up for adoption. And during the time that she had been pregnant, going a little bit pre-birth here, she was living in different houses that were for young women. I think she was 19, that were pregnant and not married, so people would take them in and they would live there. And she was thinking about moving to California. I think California Dreaming, the song, may have been out by then. I'm not sure about that, but she was doing her own California Dreaming and thinking about moving west, but she never did. And I think that's kind of interesting, because I did end up I now live in California, so maybe there's some symbolism there. My birth father, was either the guy that she was dating at the time, a guy that she had an affair with, her ex-husband. She had been married very young, so it could have been her ex-husband who raped her on her birthday, violent alcoholic guy. And that's a disturbing thought, but I think it was the boyfriend. And then I found out there was a fourth potential one, who was the guy who, I think maybe an exchange student, was going off to England, and she had sex with him before he went. So 4 different potential fathers, and I've thought about this as different archetypes for maybe my past life stuff, or maybe just general male archetypes. You got the good boyfriend, the bad boy, guy to have the affair with. There was the aloof, I'm off to explore as an individual overseas kind of traveler archetype, and then there's the violent rapist, aggressive, no respect for another person kind of energy. So that was all the vibes, that all mingled together. And then my dad, who's now dead, he killed himself about 7 years ago now, I guess. Yeah, a little over 7 years ago. He was perhaps the person that I had the most individual karma similar to, perhaps. He didn't feel loved growing up, and he tried to let my sister and I know we were loved and communicate that, but he was always looking for love. He had a lot of affairs and just really never really found himself. So he developed Parkinson's around the age of 60 or so. Prior to 60, I think, actually. And then apparently he didn't leave a note or anything, but he wanted to not be here anymore. So I think that maybe I had the most life path lessons that related to him, but these 4 original birth fathers, I think it was the one based on his looks, and I had contact with him, and I just intuit that it was the boyfriend guy. But nevertheless, back to my birth. I'm not being seen by my birth mom as I'm given birth to. But when she woke up after the birth, I think she had an IV in her, and she got up and she was walking around and looking, and then she found the nursery section, and she was looking in there, and then somebody came along and told her she had to go back to her bed, and she was like, "Is that my baby? Where's my baby?" And that may have been the only time we saw each other, because I did find her later on, but there was no in-person meeting between us because we didn't connect. It was not a healing experience, but I'll cover that in another video. In terms of my birth, though, I then went out to an adoption agency to live, or a hospital setting. I'm not really sure. I always thought that I was adopted within a couple weeks, but when I did some research around the age of late 20s or so, I found out from the adoption agency that I was researching that I hadn't been adopted till I was 5.5 months old, and it just never came up in the family that I was growing up with. So I always had this assumption that when I was studying counseling psychology and just learning about developmental stuff, I didn't really think about it much in terms of me. But then when I found out I was like spending 5.5 months, alone, then that was a big shock. But it also helped me make more sense of a lustful, turned-on moment I had in college with a porn where a guy was dressed up like a baby, and there was a nurse that came up to him, and they had sex, and I just got so aroused. And it's like, on a bodily, emotional level, nurses were probably my first caregivers and my source of attachment, like wanting to attach. But did not have that kind of secure attachment, so that may have affected me over time in terms of my own insecurities that would come up in relationships and fears and just all that stuff. So 5.5 months, I was adopted by a young couple, 22 and 23 years old, and lived in a little suburban neighborhood in Midland, Michigan, home of Dow Chemical, where my dad worked. And then I just, I remember vaguely going camping. I remember watching Johnny Quest on television, the cartoon, not knowing if he was riding a log or an alligator in my retrospect memory. I remember looking out of my little playpen or crib. There was a cracked door to the room. My grandmother just walked by in the hallway, didn't look in. I think I was very, very young when I remembered that, when that happened. So there may be some symbolism about not feeling seen. I think it was Alfred Adler who talked about early memories, your very first memories having symbolism. I also remembered being on this bridge related to a camping memory where there was like maybe half of the bridge had a railing and the other just was a drop-off, and I'm sure I remembered it wrong, but I was there with my dad. There's no way I'd be on a bridge that was that unsafe as I remember it, but to me it felt very unsafe. And I think being there with my dad, that's the symbolism of just being on a bridge. I live near a bridge now in the Bay Area and can see it from my home and just feel like I'm part of this bridge into a new kind of world, and things felt very shaky on this bridge when I was a kid, so there may be some symbolism in my own shakiness as I bridge ahead into this new world, which I believe will have a lot less drama and a lot more peace, and I see people awakening and dealing with their stuff, and there just being a lot more consciousness now that we're, not everybody, but a handful of people at least are moving into higher levels of awareness, because that's where peace awaits. So those are the most significant things I can remember from my birth / very early childhood memories. So I'll pick it up next time. Thanks for listening.